Sure, I can easily define wokeness for you. Woke is broadly defined as cult-like adherence to leftist social orthodoxy. Now, in and of itself, that seems relatively broad, and it is. The reason? Leftist orthodoxy changes as it has no moral foundation, though its current iteration is strongly rooted in critical theory, postmodernism, and their derivatives. Meaning, you have postmodernist thought, you have critical theory, critical race theory, critical gender theory. What is critical theory? Let me slow you down. Rooted in Marxist ideology that there are the oppressed and the oppressors. Critical race theory believes that there are oppressed and oppressors not based on class, but based on race. Kimberly Crenshaw, when she wrote the book, and I believe many other scholars contributed, argued that Marx did not understand racial dynamics in other countries because where he comes from was largely white. And although there were ethnic issues in the United States, the white versus black phenomena lends itself to the idea of an oppressed versus oppressor being rooted in race. Thus, critical race theory was born. Critical gender theory is typically similar in that men, the cis heteronormative patriarchy, etc., etc. Now, the reason why I say it's cult-like adherence to leftist social orthodoxy is that leftist social orthodoxy changes because there is no moral foundation. Postmodernist thought, let's dive into that. Woke is typically rooted in there is no truth but power. It was the late David Graeber, an anthropologist, who said, this is several years ago, that elements of the left have adopted fascistic ideologies such as there is no truth but power. That was a key component of Nazism. I am not saying that woke people are Nazis, although they share a lot in common with typical authoritarian regimes. Now, there are many people, like Ben Shapiro, for instance, who want to define wokeness and say it has to do with postmodernist, blah, blah, blah. The reason why I say that's wrong is because woke, as a political faction, does describe certain phenomena that changes, and so we may be able to identify key components of it today, like critical race theory. The issue is the overarching faction of leftist social orthodoxy that we associate with wokeness is broad and meaningless. Now, hold on. What does it mean meaningless? Ask yourself why it is that the same people who are woke defend Ukraine war. What about, I don't know, critical race theory lends itself to waving a Ukrainian flag? Okay. What about defending minorities getting preferential treatment in the workplace has anything to do with COVID masks, vaccines, and lockdowns? Nothing. Literally nothing. So what does woke mean? Well, you can find different groups of people who identify key components of wokeness in various ways, and they will tell you wokeness is postmodernist thought in a modern context, blah, blah, blah. And then I pause and say, the reason why I define woke as cult-like adherence to leftist social orthodoxy is because if you were to take a broad view of all of the criticisms of woke, that's what you get. Hyper-focusing in one area will wield you its critical gender theory, its postmodernist philosophy, its fascistic tenets. It is critical gender theory, or critical race theory. It is critical theory. It is Marxism. All of these different things are because constitutional Republican moral foundation Americans are looking at one component of what woke is. And so, what do you end up seeing with woke? It is the leftist social orthodoxy. Now, there are people who follow the leftist social orthodoxy who are not woke. Why? They don't adhere to it in a cult-like fashion. You may describe these individuals as default liberal. You meet them and they say these things, and then you ask them how they go, honestly, I don't know that much. I don't know. I just saw that. There's no cult-like adherence to it. So wokeness is typically, for instance, a big brand puts up a Black Lives Matter flag and says, we agree with Black Lives Matter. That's woke. Why? It is the cult-like adherence to a leftist social orthodoxy that is fleeting. Black Lives Matter is not even in the conversation anymore. Let's entertain this. The Black Lives Matter Global Foundation was accused of funneling money into private properties and other crazy, ridiculous expenditures. And now it's no longer an equation in the woke world, but woke persists. Why? Because woke is defined as cult-like adherence to leftist social orthodoxy. So when the average person says this is woke, you need to ask them, whittle it down to the granular, what you specifically mean. But I will tell you, the reason why I define it broadly is this corporation adhering to leftist social orthodoxy for no reason, with no explanation, no ideology, and no moral foundation. Bud Light got woke, went broke. What does that mean? The company had no idea what's going on. They just decided to march in lockstep with the likes of Dylan Mulvaney. Of course, the media will lie and say it was one promotional can. Wrong. Bud Light hired Dylan Mulvaney to grab a bunch of beer cans, promote March Madness a year ago, and was paid reportedly 6 figures to do so. The media then obfuscated this by claiming it was all an outrage over one promotional can that never even got sold anywhere. Wrong. The outrage started when Dylan Mulvaney did a paid commercial for Bud Light. So what is woke? It is exactly that. Bud Light decided to get on board with leftist social orthodoxy for promotion, and which this includes gender ideology and things of that nature, and then they lost $1.4 billion. So, to wrap this all up in a neat little bow, the right, the quote-unquote right, the far right, whatever, of the culture war, is a disparate group of varying ideologies that often disagree with each other, hence the difficulty in organizing. Woke is the left marches in lockstep, terrified in a Mexican standoff of being canceled. And so they adhere to a ever-influx leftist social orthodoxy, which doesn't really mean anything other than you are a part of the swarm or else. Put it simply, while we currently do say that woke has strong components of postmodernist and critical theory and Marxism in it, for the most part, the people who are woke are just in a swarm of wasps, worried that if they break ranks, they will be attacked by the hive. So they just march in lockstep. Woke.